Well, I have finally seen Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Yes, that is right. These eyeballs right here have finally seen Christopher Nolan's latest film. And holy moly, bro cooked with this movie. Now, I obviously had to go see this movie in IMAX. I went and I saw this movie in, it was a city that was like 2.5 hours away from where I lived because there weren't really any IMAX screenings in my hometown, so I kind of had to drive a bit further out. But it was okay because I was going to that city anyways, so I was like, you know what? I'm going there anyways. Might as well go see that movie in IMAX at that city where I'm going to, and that is what I did. And yeah, seeing it in IMAX is a lot different than seeing it in like a normal theater because the screen is just so huge, and especially because like this movie was like made specifically for IMAX, like it was shot on an IMAX camera and everything. So like the scale of it was just absolutely insane. And yeah, this movie was pretty dang good, if I'm being honest here. Now, there's been a lot of unnecessary controversy with this movie, mostly just people, just being like those angry type of people that you see on the internet that just talk about nonsense and just like, the most absurd things, or just being honestly racist. But yeah, everyone, like, I don't really have a problem with anyone in the movie. Like, everyone did a pretty good job. Even Travis Scott, yes, that is right. Travis Scott is in this movie, and like everyone in the movie did perfectly fine. Like, I didn't have a problem with anybody in the movie. And especially like Matt Damon and Tom Holland, they are like the two standout actors in this movie. Because obviously Matt Damon plays Odysseus, and then Tom Holland plays Matt Damon's son, Telemachus, I think his name is. I'm pretty sure that is how you pronounce his name. But he plays the son of Odysseus, and honestly thought Tom Holland did a pretty good job. There's like this one scene in particular where he's like yelling at Robert Pattinson, or his character's name is Antinous in the movie, but like he yells at them, and that scene was like, I was like, okay. I was like, Tom Holland, you can act. Like, everyone likes to just hate on Tom Holland and his acting because, they only know him from like Spider-Man and they haven't really like seen him in anything else. But like Tom Holland can act. Like he acts his ass off in this movie, and it was pretty dang good. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, getting on to like what happens in this movie. This whole like movie is about Odysseus and his return home to like his kingdom, like his palace and all that, because he originally starts this movie at like, the shore. He's like washed up on shore. Well, actually, he doesn't really like you don't really start the movie with him, if you know what I'm saying. Like the movie kind of starts with Tom Holland and, his mom, and they're like wondering what happened to Odysseus, and then you start getting these flashbacks of what happened to Odysseus, and then you find out Odysseus ended up getting washed onto the shore where he meets this one lady whose name I don't remember. As a matter of fact, I didn't really pick up on anybody's name in the movie aside from like Odysseus and Tom Holland's like Telemachus. Those were like the only two names that I like locked in. And I was like, okay, these characters are these guys' names. Everybody else, I was like, I don't remember any of their names. I had to look it up before like making this video, because even though I'm pretty sure they probably have said it, or they do say it in the movie, they say it like so like quietly, or I just like wasn't paying attention because I'm like, I don't know nobody's names except for Odysseus and Telemachus. That is basically the only two characters' names that I remembered. But yeah, like I said, Odysseus ends up getting washed onto the shore where he meets this one lady who I'm pretty sure is Charlize Theron's character. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna look up her name real quick. Okay, so it turns out that Charlize Theron plays Calypso, and she's the character who, like, basically keeps Odysseus on this island because Odysseus is trying to, like, figure out who he is and how he got onto the island and what happened to his men because he doesn't really remember anything, and that is because Calypso has been feeding him this like flower thing, this like plant flower that he likes to eat. And what the flower does is it clouds your mind. It basically just, if my forehead is looking kind of shiny here, it is because it is insanely hot. You know what? I'm turning this fan on. I have a fan right here in this room, and it is so hot over the summer. I'm turning this fan on. So if you hear the fan on in the background, oh well. But yeah, basically, Calypso feeds Odysseus this like blue flower thing, and that is because it ends up like clouding his mind so that he can't really remember anything. But then over time, he eventually starts to remember what happened to him and what happened to his men because he's like the only person who washed up on the shore. Like he had this crew of like all of these men, like probably 50 or so men. I don't really know if it was that many. It was probably like around 20 to 30 people. But he had this huge crew of men, and basically they were trying to figure out how to get back home after the War of Troy. Like they had this huge war, and they ended up winning that war. And so then Odysseus and his group of men, they had these three ships, and they were trying to find their way back home. And then basically the movie is kind of just like, or like his memory is just of them going to like point or like one island to the next island to the next island, and it's probably like that for like 3 or 4 times where they land on an island and they drop down on the island and they go to investigate what's on the island. And I'm not gonna lie, every time they investigate the island, you're just waiting for some crazy shit to go down because this movie is rated R. Now, it doesn't really need the R rating, in my opinion, but it does benefit from the R rating because that means that you don't have to hold nothing back. You don't have to hold back on the language or like on like the graphicness of it. But even though, like I said, it doesn't really need the R rating, it still benefits from the R rating because there are some pretty crazy scenes that go down. Like the first time Odysseus and his group of men drop down on an island and they start investigating, you are just waiting for something to happen because like everyone knows the Odyssey for the Cyclops. That is like the main thing people know the Odyssey for. Like, oh, I know there's a Cyclops in it. That's kind of all I know. Like even Tom Holland, who played Telemachus, was like, I know there's a Cyclops in the movie. That was really all I knew before going into it. So it's like everyone knows the Odyssey for the Cyclops. And you see the Cyclops in the trailer when he's like, in the cave and whatnot. So when Odysseus and his group of men start like go into a cave, you're just sitting there waiting for the Cyclops to appear, and you don't know if it's gonna be a jump scare or if he's just gonna emerge. Like you don't know what is going to happen because it is an R-rated movie. So like there could be a jump scare, there could not be. So you were just sitting there, butthole clenched, ready to see this Cyclops appear. And when he appears, holy moly, Christopher Nolan cooked with that scene. Like, it is crazy because it is not a jump scare scene. It's not a scene where, he just like appears already in the cave. No, because Odysseus and his crew, they go into the cave and then they see this like fire pit and then this like horde of sheep. And then they're like, oh, someone lives here. Like, there's somebody living in this cave. And you're just sitting there like, that Cyclops is about to tear up Odysseus and his crew any second now. And sure enough, yeah, they hear someone like approaching the cave and they're all like ready to start like fighting and all that. And then you finally get the reveal of the Cyclops and he just starts attacking people and like eating people, and then he just goes and sits down and goes to sleep. And then they're like, do we kill him or do we just let him sleep? Like, I mean, he's not attacking us, so we don't really have a reason to attack him. So then they just kind of like sit there and they're just like, well, the cave is closed, so we can't really leave. We just have to wait it out. And then they just end up sitting there overnight, and then when the Cyclops finally awakes and goes to take his horde of sheep out, that is when Odysseus and some of his crew end up dying, but Odysseus and the crew that don't die, I think it's really only like 2 and 3 people that end up dying to the Cyclops, but the people that make it out, they get out the cave, and then they go to the next island. They're like, screw that island, we getting up on out of here. Like, we're skedaddling. We're moving on to the next island. Screw that Cyclops. We out. And then they just dip immediately, first chance they get. And then they go to the next island, and they're walking around, and they're like, this island doesn't have a giant Cyclops, so maybe it's not that bad. And then they see this girl, this like little girl there, and they're like, we come in peace. We are not fighting nobody today. We're just here. What's up? And the girl just starts losing her mind. Like, she just starts screaming, running away, and they're just like, okay. And then, right after that girl runs away, these, like, it's not like another Cyclops or anything, but like these giant dudes, like these literally like 8 foot tall guys just start walking in to the frame, and everyone is looking up at them like, holy shit, we out of here. And so they just immediately start running back to the island or back to their boats again, because they're like, screw that island, we out. And so they end up losing like another couple. They actually end up losing 2 whole ships to those like super tall dudes. Like, to the giant Cyclops creature, they only lost like maybe 4 or 5 dudes. But to the people who were like 8 feet tall, they lost like 2 boats with men in those boats. So then it's just Odysseus's boat and the people that are, on that boat with him. And they're like, well, what do we do now? And Odysseus is like, on to the next island, I guess. And then they end up going to another island, a third island. And that is when they meet this witch lady who, holy moly, she was kind of crazy, I'm not gonna lie, because she feeds Odysseus' crew. Odysseus is like off hunting, doing his own thing. And so she feeds Odysseus' crew, and then she just starts turning them into pigs. I swear to God, I'm not making this up. She just starts grabbing their face and like transforms all of his men into pigs. And then Odysseus comes back and he meets the witch lady, and then he's like, wait a minute, did you turn my men into pigs? And then he ends up having like a talk with her, and she changes them all back. So, she was kind of crazy, but at the end of the day, she changes them back to normal, and I guess it's all good. But it don't matter, because they all end up dying anyways, because they go to another island after leaving the crazy witch lady's island, and that is when they go through like the people of hell. There's like this cult that they have to do to like summon their like army that's like dead, like the soldiers that died fighting in the war. And after that, they're like, well, we can't leave this island until the wind dies down. So I guess we just stuck here for a little bit. And then as soon as the wind dies down, they leave. But then Odysseus is like, yeah, the wind died down, but it died down just long enough for us to leave the island. And then it ended up killing everybody on board except for Odysseus. Odysseus ended up getting, like, he ended up falling off the boat, and he ended up getting washed up onto the shore where Calypso was. And then, yeah, that is where he finally realizes that, oh shoot, all my men are dead. I'm the only one left. Even though the whole movie he was like trying to prevent the gods is like faith or like destiny or whatever. Because the gods were telling him that like, oh, all your men are gonna die. You're gonna be the only one to return home. And he's like, nah, screw that shit. I'm going to defy the gods. I'm bringing me and my men home. Screw you, Poseidon. I ain't dealing with that. And guess what? All his men ended up dying because Poseidon said, you think you and your men are going to return home? Bet. And then throws a huge storm at them. And yeah, all his men die. And it's just Odysseus left. And Odysseus is sitting there on the island like, damn, my men are dead. I'm the only one left. I gotta get up on out of this island. Screw you, Calypso. I'm out. And so he ends up leaving the island and ends up getting washed up onto his home island somehow. Like he goes on this raft. He leaves the island on the raft, and then a big giant storm happens. And Calypso's like, "Oh, you just have to accept the storm. Like you don't have to fight it or anything. Just like let it take you in, and it'll bring you home." And so Odysseus is like, "I bet." So he goes on the raft, and the storm happens. He falls in the water and gets washed up back on his island, even after Tom Holland's character leaves the island earlier on in the movie to go and try and find his dad, which he never does. He doesn't find his dad, but he believes his dad is still alive out there. He's like, I know my father is still alive. There's no way that he's dead. Bro's still alive. Everyone around him is telling him, like, yo, daddy's dead, bro. Like, he's cooked. He ain't coming back. It's time to get your mom to remarry somebody. He ain't coming back. And guess what? He's like, screw y'all. My daddy's out there somewhere. I'm gonna find him. And he doesn't find him, but it don't matter because his daddy ended up getting washed up on shore anyways. And so, yeah, Odysseus comes back and he pretends to be like this beggar, like this guy who's like, obviously not Odysseus because Calypso tells him that, like, you can't just go onto the shore or onto your land and be like, hey, yo, everybody, I'm back. What's good? Like, you can't do that. So you gotta, like, ease your way into it. So he's like, I bet. So he goes to the island or back home to his palace, his kingdom, and all that, and he pretends to be like this beggar so that he can get close to Telemachus and he can, ease his way back into power, obviously. And so it doesn't really take that long for Tom Holland to realize that Odysseus is his father. Like he doesn't know that it's him for like a little bit. Like when he first arrives, he's like, "Oh, are you a beggar?" Like he just assumes that he's just like this normal beggar guy. And then it probably takes him maybe like 2 hours to realize that, like, or I guess in the movie it takes maybe like 20 minutes before he realizes that, like, wait a second, you're my dad. Like he's literally, at first he believes that he's just a beggar and all that, but then he sees that like Odysseus is fighting everybody really good, and he's like, wow, you can really fight for a beggar. And he's like, yeah, I fought for your dad. Like Odysseus is pretending to be someone else, and he's like, oh, I fought alongside your father, so I'm really good at combat and stuff like that. And then he goes and sees this dog, and he's like, you know, comforting the dog because the dog's in pain. And then Telemachus like looks at him and he's like, "You're my dad. You are Odysseus. You have returned home. What's good, Dad? Let's go into the palace now." And so he goes into the palace, and then that leads to the scene that I was talking about earlier on in the video where I said that there's this scene where like Tom Holland shouts at Robert Pattinson's character. And yeah, that scene in the IMAX theater, I was like, oh, like he can act. Like he was pretty dang good in the movie. Because basically what happens is Antinous is who Robert Pattinson plays. He is like, kicking his father, and he's like beating him to the ground, and so he gets angry at him and he like shouts at him, and everyone's taken back by it because he's like, enough, the feast is done. And so everybody leaves. And then the wife, who's played by Anne Hathaway, she is like, my husband ain't coming home. I guess I gotta remarry. Even though Odysseus is right there talking to her, she's like, my husband ain't coming home. I guess I gotta remarry. And so she holds this trial so that if anyone could take this bow and like pull the string to connect the bow, because only Odysseus was able to like pull the string and connect the bow and shoot the bow and arrow. Everyone else who tried to do it just could not like get the bow to connect to the arrow. They would always fail. But Odysseus was like the only person who could connect the bow. So she's like, all right, if y'all want me to marry you, take this bow, connect it with the arrow, and fire it at the target, and I will marry you. And everybody is trying, and they're all failing. And then Robert Pattinson is like, you know what? There's no point. I know I ain't gonna be able to take that bow and arrow and shoot it and connect it properly. He's like, everybody in this room has tried. There's no point in me trying. And then that is when Odysseus is like, I haven't tried it. Everybody looks at him and just starts losing their mind because, he's a beggar, so he looks like a poor person, so they're all just like laughing their ass off. They're like, oh, look, it's a beggar trying to, take part in the trial. And they're like, everyone has a right to participate in the trial. So everybody's laughing at him. They're all making fun of him. And guess what? He connects that bow and arrow. He shoots that shit. And everybody looks at him and they're like, that's Odysseus right there. You are literally Odysseus. And then the guy who says that dies. And then that is when, Odysseus finally reveals himself that he's returned home. And everybody's like, holy shit, that is Odysseus. We are cooked. And then there's this huge, final third act where it is pretty dang solid. It is where, Odysseus is fighting the people in the palace, and then he ends up killing everybody. Even Robert Pattinson's character ends up dying to him, and then he ends up making Telemachus, his son, the heir to the throne, or he ends up making him king, even though he's returned. He's like, Telemachus, you're king now. And then he ends up sailing off into the sunset, chasing the sun so that he can honor his men because, obviously all his men died and he's like, I don't really have time to mourn them right now, but I will later. And then, obviously, at the end of the movie, that's when he chooses to honor his men, when he goes onto the ship and sails towards the sunset, and then he makes his son the new king. And that is essentially where the movie ends. And like I said, it is a pretty dang good movie. I like the whole journey. I like how you don't really know if Odysseus is alive until around the middle part, or around a third of the movie. That is when you find out that he is alive, because at the start of the movie it's just Tom Holland and everyone questioning whether or not Odysseus is alive, and then you start getting the flashbacks and all that, and then you find out that he is alive. And I do like the journey that he takes from, going from all these different islands and all the different things that are on these islands. It is pretty dang good, and I have to say, Benny Safdie's character had the most aura in the movie. Anytime Benny Safdie's character was on screen, it was just aura the movie. It was literally just he was just the main aura character, because anytime he was on screen, he was just standing there and not doing anything, not saying anything. He was just standing there, and there's this one scene in particular where Odysseus and his crew are going to open these doors, and then they finally open the door to start the war, and then it is just, I think his name is Anna Gemnin? Isn't that his name? I'm pretty sure that is how you pronounce his character's name. And he's just standing there behind the doors, and he walks out, and there's this super cool music playing, and it was a pretty dang good scene. Any scene Benny Safdie was in was just aura. It was literally crazy every time he was on screen. But yeah, if I had to rate this movie, I would give it probably an 8.5 out of 10. It was pretty dang solid. I didn't really have any problems with it whatsoever. I think I like this more than Oppenheimer, because Oppenheimer, I liked the movie. I liked the build up towards the bomb. The bomb going off, I was like, all right, this is hype. But then after the bomb went off, I feel like it kind of started to drag a little bit. But in this case, in this movie, The Odyssey, I didn't really have any moments where it felt like it was kind of dragging. Maybe towards the start, it kind of felt like it was a little bit dragging. But after that, I was fully locked in from start to finish. So yeah, I do think I like this movie more than The Odyssey. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. We are only 71 subscribers away from 800. We're at 729. So if you have not subscribed yet, make sure you're subscribed. And if you've gotten around to watching The Odyssey, you can let me know what you thought of it. And if you're looking forward to Christopher Nolan's next movie, which who knows when that's going to be, but we'll just have to wait and see. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.